I was never really the kind of guy who stirred the pot. At 33, I've made a quiet little life with my wife, Mia. We're both teachers. We live in a modest two-bedroom home in a sleepy town just outside of Seattle, and we spend our weekends grading papers and arguing over what to order for takeout. Nothing about our life is flashy, and honestly, I liked it that way. Peaceful, predictable. But sometimes, even when you do everything right, the chaos finds you anyway. And in my case, it started with a garden party and a glass of white wine in my mother-in-law's perfectly manicured backyard. Let me back up a little. My mother-in-law, Judith, is the type of woman who commands every room she walks into. She doesn't speak loudly. She doesn't have to. She's elegant, icy, and meticulous to a fault. She's always been polite to me, but in that way where you know she's silently evaluating every word out of your mouth, like she's scoring a figure skating routine. If you asked her, I'm sure she'd say she tolerates me. I'm not flashy, not rich, not a lawyer or surgeon like her friend's sons-in-law. Just a guy who loves her daughter, and I suppose that never quite made the cut. Mia has one sibling, her older sister, Lauren. And Lauren, well, she's everything Judith ever wanted in a daughter. She's loud, dramatic, thrives on being the center of attention, and somehow spins even the most mundane story into a Shakespearean monologue. She married twice, both times to guys with deep pockets and even deeper egos, and now floats between running some wellness brand and posting inspirational quotes on Instagram while sitting by infinity pools. Judith eats it all up like it's gospel. To her, Lauren is this glowing, golden figure who can do no wrong. Meanwhile, Mia, stable, kind, grounded, barely registers. The first time I really noticed the imbalance was at Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. Judith had hosted at her house like she always does, setting out her antique china and giving everyone an assigned seat at the table like it was Downton Abbey. We'd all just sat down when she raised her glass and, out of nowhere, toasted Lauren for being the heart of this family. Not Mia, not her husband, who was elbow-deep in mashed potatoes trying to serve everyone. Just Lauren, who had spent the morning posting selfies with the turkey before showing up 2 hours late in a white silk dress. I remember the sting in Mia's eyes when that toast happened. She didn't say anything, just smiled weakly and sipped her wine. But that night, when we got home, she went straight to bed without a word. I lay there for a long time listening to her breathing, the silence between us heavier than anything Judith had said aloud. I kept telling myself it was just favoritism. Not everything needed to be a war. But over time, the comments stacked up. Little things. At Mia's birthday dinner, Judith gave Lauren a bracelet just because. When we announced we were trying for a baby, Judith smiled vaguely and changed the subject to Lauren's new skincare line. At one point, she actually asked Mia if she was planning to take time off work to focus on something more feminine, like nesting, while in the same breath praising Lauren for being so business-savvy and independent. The kicker, though, was what happened last spring. Judith owns 2 houses, her main home where all the parties happen, and a lake house that's been in her family for decades. We'd spent summers there when Mia and I first started dating, and she used to tell me how she dreamed of raising our future kids near that lake. It was her happy place. Ours, even. I didn't think much about the inheritance situation. We were never after anything. But one day, Judith hosted one of her garden parties, and that's when things shifted from cold shoulders to open declarations. I was helping her set up the dessert table, mostly because Mia had a migraine and was resting inside, when I overheard Judith chatting with a few of her friends. They were all sipping from their wine glasses, laughing that wine mom laugh, and one of them must have asked something about estate planning, because Judith, without hesitation, said, "Oh, both properties will go to Lauren, of course. She's the heart of this family, the backbone. It just makes sense." I froze. I wasn't meant to hear it, clearly, but she said it with this calm certainty, like it was already signed, sealed, and delivered. Like Mia didn't even factor into the equation. I pretended to focus on the lemon bars, but my hands were shaking. Later that night, I told Mia what I'd heard. She just sat there, hugging her knees to her chest on our couch, staring at the floor like she'd already known. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd known for years that her mother never truly saw her. But hearing it spoken aloud, so bluntly, hit a nerve I don't think either of us expected. We didn't bring it up to Judith. What was the point? She would have denied it, or worse. just nodded and said it was her decision to make. Still, something about that moment stuck with me. Like a splinter. It wasn't even about the property. It was about the message, you don't matter. You're invisible. But the universe has a funny way of tipping things sideways when you least expect it. And a few months later, something happened that none of us saw coming. Not even Judith. Because while she was out playing Queen of the Garden parties and rehearsing her next toast to Lauren, someone else was watching quietly from the sidelines. Someone with the power to flip the script. Her husband. Mia's father. And he had plans of his own. I wish I could say things simmered down after that garden party. That maybe Judith realized how much she'd hurt her daughter, or that we all started communicating better, like one of those miracle breakthroughs in family therapy. But no, things got worse. Subtler at first, like a slow poison, but worse all the same. And I think, looking back, Judith did it deliberately. Almost like she was testing how far she could push Mia before she snapped. It began with the lake house. That place was practically sacred to Mia. Her childhood summers were built around that cabin. Campfires on the dock, catching frogs in the reeds, her dad teaching her how to skip stones. I'd heard the stories so many times I could recite them myself. It was the one place that felt untouched by Judith's icy standards. But in late spring, Lauren started dropping hints in the family group chat, photos of home decor magazines, links to Pinterest boards with lake house inspiration, captions like future plans. Mia asked her directly what she meant, and Lauren replied like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Oh, Mom said I could start redecorating this summer. She wants it to feel more modern. Less, rustic bunkhouse chic. I watched Mia reread the message 3 times, like maybe she'd misunderstood. But she hadn't. Judith had never mentioned anything to her about the lake house changing hands, or being remodeled. Nothing. Just decided, quietly, that it would go to Lauren, and let her start ripping away Mia's memories one throw pillow at a time. When Mia called her mom about it, the conversation lasted under 2 minutes. Judith confirmed it plainly. Lauren has better taste. And she's the one who entertains guests. You never really use the place anyway. It was like someone kicked her in the chest. I found her curled up in the hallway after that call, eyes red, phone dangling in one hand. I sat with her for over an hour and didn't say a word. There wasn't anything to say. After that, we stopped going to the lake house entirely. Lauren and her husband Jason took over, of course. Posted filtered photos of their wine nights on the deck. Installed a fire pit. Got rid of the old rocking chairs on the porch that Mia's grandfather built by hand. Then came Judith's birthday in July. She threw a huge brunch at some fancy rooftop spot in the city. One of those places with $24 pancakes and complimentary valet parking that cost $20. Mia and I arrived early, like always, with a thoughtful gift we picked out together. A framed photo of Judith's parents, restored from an old black and white image we found in a dusty box of albums during a spring cleaning visit. Mia had even written a note explaining the story behind it. Judith barely looked at it. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, setting it aside without even reading the note. Then Lauren waltzed in 20 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors and holding a gift bag from some designer brand. Judith lit up like it was Christmas morning. They hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years, even though they FaceTimed twice a day. Lauren's gift? A monogrammed silk robe. Judith paraded it around the table like it was a trophy. I saw Mia's fingers tighten around her mimosa glass. That day, I noticed something different in Mia. Not just sadness. There was this tightening behind her eyes, like a wire pulled taut. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had the day I overheard Judith dismissing her like a footnote. Things came to a head not long after that. Judith decided to host a legacy dinner. That was her actual term for it. A sort of pseudo-formal gathering where she'd go over her will and estate plans, so there would be no confusion. It sounded dramatic, but Judith was always theatrical when it came to appearances. She invited just immediate family, Mia, Lauren, their husbands, and their father, Harold. Now, Harold, he's a quiet man. Always has been. A retired engineer with a love for woodworking and black coffee. Judith steamrolled most conversations, and he let her. But he watched. I'd seen it. And something about the way he looked at Mia, soft, understanding, told me he saw more than he let on. Anyway, the legacy dinner. It was set up in Judith's dining room like a corporate presentation. She even had printed folders at each seat with some bullet-pointed outline inside. The woman could turn Sunday lunch into a TED Talk if you let her. She stood at the head of the table and launched into it like she was unveiling a new product. As you all know, she began, I've worked hard to build and maintain this family's legacy. It's important to me that my values are carried on. I saw Mia glance at me, nervous. I squeezed her hand under the table. Judith continued, outlining various small things, artwork, jewelry, china, most of which she'd earmarked for Lauren already. Then came the big one. As for the properties, she said, pausing dramatically, the main house and the lake house will both go to Lauren. Just like that. Mia didn't speak. Neither did I. Judith didn't even look our way as she said it, like we weren't in the room. But Harold looked directly at me, then at Mia. His eyes lingered. He didn't say anything, but something passed between us. A moment, an understanding. Lauren, of course, was beaming. Wow, Mom. I mean, thank you. I'll take good care of them, she said, practically preening. Judith raised her wine glass. To legacy, she said. I didn't toast. Neither did Mia. The days after that dinner were hard. Mia barely spoke. She still went to work, still graded her papers, still made dinner. But there was a heaviness to her movements, like she was underwater. I tried to cheer her up, little things, like coffee runs or movie nights, but nothing stuck. And to be honest, I was seething. Not because of the houses, not really, but because of what it meant. That Mia's own mother had erased her from the picture of her family's future. Like she didn't belong. Then came the betrayal that broke everything. 3 weeks later, Lauren posted a video on Instagram. One of those overly polished ones with music and slow-motion filters. It showed her walking through the lake house, now completely renovated. Gone were the old quilted couches and vintage signs. In their place were sleek white walls, hanging plants, modern light fixtures. At the end of the video, Lauren sat on the porch with a mug that said, Boss Lady, captioned, New Beginnings. Can't wait to make memories here. Mia didn't say a word when she saw it. Just turned off her phone, stood up from the couch, and walked into the bedroom. She shut the door behind her. I sat there, heart pounding, watching that video on loop. Watching Lauren walk through what should have been Mia's safe place. Smiling like she hadn't just stolen her sister's soul. The next morning, Harold called me. It wasn't a long call. He didn't say much. Just asked if I could come over alone. Said it was important. His voice was calm, but there was something urgent under it. When I arrived, he led me to his study. This old room filled with books and dust, and that smell of cedar he always carried. He didn't sit. Just stood by the window, looking out at the backyard. I saw what Judith did, he said quietly. I didn't answer. Just waited. She's always favored Lauren. I kept hoping she'd grow out of it. But, well, you see how that turned out. He turned to me then, eyes heavy with something that felt like guilt. I can't undo what she said at that dinner, he said. But I can make sure your wife isn't erased from this family. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and handed it to me. Inside was a deed. To the lake house. Signed. Notarized. Transferred. To me. I blinked. Looked up at him. She doesn't know, he said. She thinks she controls everything. But I bought out her share of the lake house years ago, after some disagreements. She was more interested in the main house anyway. This one was mine to give. I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry. Don't tell Mia yet, he added. Wait until the right moment. Let her have this when she needs it most. I left that day with my heart in my throat and the envelope tucked inside my coat like it was a live wire. And I knew something had changed. Judith might have thought she won. Might have thought she could sculpt the future in her image and cast aside anyone who didn't shine the way she wanted. But the foundation she stood on was starting to crack. And I had just been handed the first hammer. It took me a few days to even process what Harold had done. I'd never been the kind of person who held secrets, especially not from Mia. We told each other everything. That's what made us work, even when everything else felt like it was unraveling. But this wasn't just a secret. It was a bomb, a gift and a curse, all at once. Every time I looked at the envelope, I felt the weight of it in my chest. Not just the property it represented, but what it meant, the trust Harold had in me. The quiet rebellion he'd launched against the woman he'd spent over 3 decades married to. He didn't scream or demand recognition. He just made a move and let it sit. A move that might change everything. But still, I waited. Meanwhile, life at home had taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. I thought the worst of it would be watching Mia grieve the loss of her mother's love, but grief is strange. It doesn't always look like tears or angry outbursts. Sometimes it looks like emptiness. She was shutting down. Not dramatically. Not in the way Lauren would have made a whole saga out of it with 12 Instagram stories and a photo in black and white, but in that quiet, terrible way where she stopped humming when she cooked, stopped reaching for my hand while we watched TV, stopped arguing about whether we needed new curtains or not. The sparkle in her eyes was gone. I tried everything I could think of. Weekend getaways, cooking her favorite meals, even wrote her a letter one night and slipped it into her work bag, telling her how proud I was of her and how much I admired her strength. She never mentioned it. I found it a week later, still unopened, tucked in the side pocket under a granola bar. That was when I hit my own low point. It was late. Mia had gone to bed early again, without saying much. I was sitting alone on the couch with my laptop open, staring at our joint bank account, and for some reason, I just started thinking about all the things I wasn't. I wasn't the kind of man her mother wanted her to marry. I wasn't rich or powerful or charming like Jason, Lauren's husband. I didn't own a business or throw big parties. I was just a guy who taught English lit and believed in thank you notes and holding the door open for strangers. And somehow, that had never felt smaller than it did right then. That night, I sat outside on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of cheap bourbon in my hand, watching the sky. I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. Not just about Mia or Judith or Lauren, but about myself, about who I was becoming, and whether I was just passively letting life happen to me. And I realized something kind of awful. I'd let Judith get to me. I'd internalized her judgments. I'd started believing, even subconsciously, that maybe I wasn't enough. That scared me more than anything. So I decided to do something about it. The next morning, I dug up an old notebook I'd used back in college when I first started teaching. It was full of half-finished essays, story ideas, and quotes I loved. At the very back was a list I barely remembered making. Things I want to do before I'm 40. Some of them were silly. Learn how to make the perfect lasagna, drive cross-country with no map, get a tattoo. But others were bigger. One in particular stood out. Write something real, something that matters. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew it was time. I needed something that belonged to me. Something no one could strip away or devalue because it wasn't flashy enough. So I started writing again. Not for work, not for a blog, just for me. Late at night, when Mia was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and scribble out scenes. Short stories, personal essays, little fragments of things I didn't even know were inside me. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to feel like myself again. Not the version of me that felt judged or dismissed, but the one who used to dream about writing books and having his own name on a spine someday. One night, I showed Mia one of the stories. I almost didn't. I was scared it would just bounce off her like everything else lately. But she read it, and when she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "This is beautiful," she whispered. It was the first time in weeks that I saw her really look at me. From there, things didn't magically fix themselves, but something shifted. Mia started coming to the table again, literally and metaphorically. We had coffee together in the mornings. We took walks after dinner, even if we didn't talk much. And one night, as we sat by the fireplace reading side by side, she reached over and took my hand like she used to. "I've been trying so hard to pretend it doesn't matter," she said quietly. "But it does." What she did, it broke something in me. "I know," I said. "I don't want to let her win. I don't want to carry this forever." "You don't have to," I said, feeling that envelope burning a hole in my desk drawer upstairs. But still, I waited. The thing about rebuilding is that it's slow. You don't wake up one day with a new foundation. You lay it brick by brick, sometimes undoing the crooked ones and starting over. But I was laying bricks. I started submitting my stories to literary journals. Got a couple of polite rejections, one glowing, almost, and then, finally, a short piece published in a small online magazine. It didn't pay anything, but it meant something. Mia printed it out and pinned it to the fridge. "You're a published author now," she grinned. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Around that same time, Judith announced she was throwing another family dinner. She said it was to celebrate Lauren's big business milestone, some podcast deal or new skincare line expansion. I didn't keep track, but something about the timing made my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner wasn't just about celebrating Lauren. Judith was planning something. She always was. Sure enough, the invitation came with a note. It will also be a good time to formally discuss any final updates to the family estate, just so we're all aligned. I knew what that meant. Judith was going to make it official, put it on paper, hand out copies, probably, make a spectacle of it so no one could question her decisions later. I showed the note to Mia. She stared at it for a long time, then said, "I don't want to go." "You don't have to," I said, but I could see the war in her eyes. The part of her that wanted to walk away clean versus the part that needed to stand in that room and be seen, even if it hurt, even if it was just to remind herself that she existed. "I need to," she said finally, "even if it's just once." I nodded. We spent the next few days in a weird limbo, going through the motions of life while quietly dreading what was coming. But I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was preparing, because Harold had given me the deed weeks ago, because Mia was stronger than Judith would ever understand, and because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply showing up when they think they've erased you. So I pulled the deed out of my desk. I made copies. I placed them in a neat folder and tucked it into my jacket pocket. And as the day of the dinner approached, I kept thinking about how we'd walk into that room together, calm, quiet, steady, while Judith had no idea what was about to hit her. She thought this dinner would be the final stamp on her carefully crafted legacy. But she forgot one thing. The heart of a family isn't something you choose. It's something that shows up even after you try to bury it. And the moment she tried to erase Mia from her story, that's the moment she started losing control of the narrative. I didn't sleep much the night before the dinner. It wasn't nerves, exactly. It was something colder, heavier, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing full well the fall would hurt, but finally having the parachute to control the descent. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking into that house defenseless. I wasn't just someone's son-in-law or the quiet teacher in the corner. I was the man holding the real legacy of Judith's so-called empire, and she didn't have a clue. I sat at the kitchen table long after Mia had gone to bed, reviewing the folder I'd prepared. I'd made 2 crisp copies of the deed, both clearly showing that Harold had transferred ownership of the lake house to me. Not to Lauren, not to the heart of the family. To me, the man she'd dismissed, disregarded, and quietly tried to erase. Each time I read it, I could feel a storm building in my chest. It wasn't anger. I'd moved past that. It was something more focused, like watching the final piece click into a lock that had been jammed for years. I wasn't planning some dramatic explosion. This wasn't about vengeance for the sake of pain. It was about truth, about Mia, about reclaiming something that should have never been taken in the first place. And for that, timing mattered. Judith's dinner was scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp. Of course, everything she did was sharply scheduled. She'd sent an itinerary in the group chat, a literal breakdown of the evening. 6 o'clock, cocktails on the patio. 6:30, dinner served. 7:15, estate presentation and announcement. 7:30, dessert. I could practically hear her voice in the bullet points. I knew 7:15 was the moment. That was the window. She would unveil her plans, pass around some smug little packets, maybe even toast Lauren again. And that's when I'd make my move. But this wasn't just my plan. I had someone else on my side, the one person Judith always underestimated. Harold. He'd called me again a few days before the dinner. It was brief, as usual, just enough to let me know he was still on board. "I'll be there," he said. "Let her say what she wants. We'll wait." That was all I needed to hear. He didn't want theatrics. He didn't want a war. He just wanted fairness. Quiet justice. And so did I. When the day finally came, I dressed with more care than I usually did. Nothing fancy, just a navy blazer, a white shirt, dark jeans, and my cleanest pair of boots. I tucked the folder inside the inner pocket of my jacket like it was a weapon. A truth bomb, locked and loaded. Mia looked radiant, but distant. She wore a soft maroon dress I hadn't seen in years, one she used to wear to job interviews back when she was first applying to schools. It was a strong color, bold, but her eyes were still guarded. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" I asked her as we stood by the front door. She didn't answer right away, just looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "I'm not going for her," she said. "I'm going for me." I nodded. "Then let's go." The ride to Judith's house was quiet. We passed familiar neighborhoods, places we'd driven through 100 times over the years. It felt strange, surreal, like we were headed towards something final, not a dinner, but a verdict. When we arrived, the driveway was already lined with high-end cars. Jason's sleek black SUV was parked front and center, and Lauren's luxury crossover, wrapped in a hideous matte rose gold, was taking up 2 spaces naturally. Judith's house looked the same as ever, pristine, curated, emotionally sterile. The kind of place where no one ever really lives. They just exist to impress guests. We rang the bell. The door swung open almost immediately. "Darling," Judith greeted us with a wide smile, her eyes quickly scanning our outfits. "You both look so polished." The compliment sounded like it was dipped in mild surprise. "Thanks for having us," I said coolly. She led us inside, pointing toward the back patio where cocktails were being served. The air smelled like rosemary and overpriced cheese. I spotted Lauren right away, perched on a cushioned lounge chair, laughing just a little too loud. Jason was next to her, talking stocks with some other in-law I didn't recognize. Harold wasn't outside yet. I could feel Mia tense beside me as Judith led her toward the group. I watched her switch into her polite daughter face, nodding, smiling, asking Lauren about her podcast numbers as if she hadn't just cried herself to sleep last week watching old lake house videos. I stayed near the bar cart, pretending to sip a whiskey neat. My eyes scanned the room, my mind counting down. 6:10, 10 minutes in. Judith floated from guest to guest like a CEO at a company retreat. She wasn't wearing a crown, but she may as well have been. At 6:30 sharp, she ushered everyone inside. Dinner was served in the same dining room where she'd held her legacy toast the year before. Long oak table, silver candlesticks, place cards with handwritten names. We were seated directly across from Lauren and Jason. I made conversation with Harold, who'd slipped in during cocktails and greeted me with a simple nod. His eyes, as always, said more than his mouth ever did. Dinner passed in a blur. Roasted duck, wild rice pilaf, steamed asparagus, elegant and tasteless. Judith kept the conversation flowing, steering it carefully between topics that orbited Lauren like satellites. Her business, her latest interview, her upcoming retreat in Bali. I watched Mia's face. She was holding together, but just barely. Then, at 7:15, almost to the second, Judith stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. "Everyone," she said, smiling. "Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Before dessert, I wanted to take a moment to formally go over a few estate matters. I know, it's a bit serious, but it's important." She turned toward the side table and picked up a stack of white folders, neatly labeled. Mia sat up straighter. I felt her hand slide into mine under the table. I gave it a gentle squeeze. Judith passed the folders out one by one, explaining as she went. "These are updated documents outlining my estate plan. I've spoken to my attorney and made everything as clear as possible to avoid confusion." Lauren was beaming. Jason looked smug. Harold sat still, hands folded. "And of course," Judith continued, "as many of you know, the main house and the lake house will go to Lauren. She's shown such dedication to family, and she's the one truly carrying on our traditions." Mia's grip on my hand tightened. I saw Harold shift slightly in his chair. "Not much, but enough. And I know this might surprise some of you," Judith added, her voice softening in a faux humble way, "but I've always followed my heart when it comes to these decisions. And my heart tells me that Lauren is the true legacy of this family." She smiled at Mia, not apologetically, but almost pitying. That's when I reached inside my jacket. I pulled out the folder, set it calmly on the table. "I have something I'd like to add," I said. All heads turned to me. Judith blinked. "Corey, this isn't." I held up a hand. Not rudely, just firmly. "I won't take much time. But since we're all discussing transparency and legacy." I slid the folder across the table to Mia. She looked at me, confused. I nodded once. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the page. And then again. And then they widened. She looked at me, then at her father. He gave her the smallest smile. "What is this?" Judith demanded, voice clipped. Mia's voice shook as she read it aloud. It's the deed. To the lake house. Transferred to Corey. Weeks ago. Signed by Dad." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judith's jaw tightened. Her posture stiffened. That's not possible," she said sharply. "Harold, what is she talking about?" Harold didn't look at her. He looked at Mia. "You were always meant to have it," he said quietly. "I just made sure of it." Lauren shot up from her seat. "Wait, what?" "That's my lake house." "You said, Mom, you said." "I said what your mother told me to say," Harold said simply. But I kept my name on that deed for a reason. And now it's Corey's. Judith's voice cracked, just once. You went behind my back. I protected our daughter, he said. Something you stopped doing a long time ago. The storm hadn't fully hit yet, but the clouds had cracked. And for the first time in years, Mia wasn't shrinking under Judith's gaze. She was rising. Judith had always been good at regaining control. She could twist a conversation with one carefully chosen phrase, reel the spotlight back to herself with a single arch of her eyebrow. But that night, for the first time I'd ever seen, she was scrambling. The room was dead silent as the truth hung in the air, thick, electric, undeniable. Judith's face was pale, but her voice snapped like dry ice. You went behind my back, she hissed at Harold again, her tone sharper now, more brittle. Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look ashamed. He just leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and calm, and said, You stopped listening a long time ago, Judith. So I stopped asking. Lauren stood frozen beside her chair, her hands twitching like she didn't know what to do with them. Her eyes darted between Judith and Harold, then to Mia, then to me, like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to tell her this wasn't real, that the rug hadn't just been yanked out from under her in front of the whole family. But it had. I looked at Mia. She was still holding the deed in both hands, her eyes locked on the paper like it might vanish if she blinked. I don't think she'd processed it fully yet, that the place she thought had been ripped from her had been hers this whole time, that someone had believed in her enough to fight for it behind the scenes, that after all the years of being treated like an afterthought, she had been the one chosen. Judith finally broke the silence again. This is insulting, Harold. You undermine me. You embarrass me in my own home. You're tearing this family apart. He shook his head. No, Judith. You did that. You did that every time you told Mia she wasn't enough. Every time you made her invisible. I just gave her what you were never going to. Lauren snapped then. This is crazy, she shouted. You can't just give it away. Mom said it was mine. I looked at her, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw the cracks. The tears threatening to spill. The disbelief. She was so used to winning by default, it never even occurred to her that the finish line might move without her permission. I'm sorry, Lauren, I said, and I meant it in a way. But it's not yours. And it never was. She turned to her mother. Do something. Judith's lips pressed into a thin line, the fury radiating off her in waves. This is not over, she said coldly. I'll take this to court if I have to. Harold raised an eyebrow. It's been legally transferred. The deed is notarized. Go ahead. Judith stared at him, her nostrils flaring. You're siding with them? Over your own wife. He took a deep breath. I'm not picking sides. I'm doing what's right. You made your decisions. I'm making mine. I could tell Judith wanted to keep arguing, wanted to claw back the conversation and paint herself as the wounded one. But she must have realized there was no audience left. The room wasn't reacting anymore. Even Jason, who'd been so smug earlier, was looking down at his plate like he wanted to melt into it. And Mia, oh Mia, she stood up, slowly, carefully, like a weight had lifted from her shoulders. And when she spoke, her voice was clear, calm, almost too calm. I've spent my whole life trying to be seen by you, she said to her mother. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, made myself small enough, maybe one day I'd be enough for you. Judith opened her mouth, but Mia kept going. But I realize now, you were never going to see me. Not really. You only see what reflects back at you, and I stopped reflecting you a long time ago. Mia, Judith said, stepping toward her. This isn't about. Mia held up a hand, and Judith froze. No more speeches. No more toasts. No more pretending like I'm lucky just to be invited to your table. She looked around the room, then back at Judith. You've spent years building this perfect picture of a family, but it's fake, and I'm done being a prop in your play. Then she turned to Harold, her voice softening. Thank you, Dad, for seeing me, for this. He gave her a small smile. I should have done more. Sooner. Mia stepped back, took my hand, and looked at me like she finally saw the version of herself I'd always seen. Strong, steady, worthy. We left after that. No dessert. No final toast. No apologies. Just the sound of Judith calling after us, her voice brittle and hollow, as we walked out the front door together. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, crisp and clean. I could feel Mia's hand trembling in mine, but she didn't let go. We got into the car. sat there for a long moment in silence. Then Mia laughed. It wasn't loud, just a small, incredulous laugh, like she didn't quite believe any of it had happened. I keep waiting for her to come running out and demand the house back, she said. She can try, I replied, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a second copy of the deed. But it's ours. She looked at it again, then at me. I didn't know he'd do that, she whispered. I didn't think anyone would ever choose me over her. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. You didn't have to be chosen. You were already enough. She nodded, blinking fast. I want to go to the lake house, she said suddenly. Right now. So we did. We drove through the night, headlights carving through the darkness like we were chasing something sacred. By the time we got there, the moon was high over the water, casting everything in silver. We stood on the porch together, the same porch where Lauren had filmed her smug little Instagram video, now just a memory that no longer had power. Mia turned the key in the door and stepped inside. It still smelled faintly like cedar and old fabric. Some of the new renovations Lauren made were visible, modern lamps, updated counters. But the soul of the place remained. We stood there for a long time. Then Mia walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and let out a deep, full breath. It sounded like peace. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from that dinner was seismic. Judith, unsurprisingly, tried damage control. She sent Mia long-winded emails, half apologies wrapped in passive aggression, trying to guilt her into reconsidering the tone she'd taken. She called Harold repeatedly, begging him to fix this, but he didn't budge. Lauren unfollowed us on every social platform. She posted vague quotes about betrayal and snakes in the grass, then quietly took down all her lake house content. Harold, meanwhile, started spending more weekends at the cabin, sometimes just for the day, sometimes overnight. He and Mia began rebuilding something I thought had long been lost. Not just a father-daughter bond, but something gentler, steadier, something real. Mia and I decided to keep the house just as it was. We didn't undo Lauren's updates. We didn't strip it down and start fresh. Instead, we layered our life over it. Photos of our own, little souvenirs from trips, cozy blankets, mugs with mismatched handles. We made it ours. One morning, while drinking coffee on the porch, Mia said, "You know, I don't think she'll ever admit she was wrong." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't matter anymore." And she was right. The revenge hadn't come from cruelty. It didn't need shouting or grand gestures. It came from reclaiming what was stolen, from stepping back into the light, from proving to everyone, including ourselves, that being overlooked doesn't mean being lesser. That quiet strength is strength. And that being the heart of the family doesn't mean making the most noise. It means being the one who keeps showing up, no matter how many times they try to write you out of the story. And as the sun rose over the lake, warming the old wooden planks beneath our feet, I realized something simple and powerful. We weren't just the footnotes anymore. We were the authors now. And this time, we were writing the ending.